for closing today, we have Kathleen and Christopher from Down Books. And they are teachers at Boston University and Rhode Island University. They are graphic design teachers, so they're going to talk about the importance of editorial design or book design in graphic design education. So yeah, please give it a big applause to welcome them. Hello.
Hello. Hello.
We can hear you perfectly.
Great. We're so happy to be here. And thank you for everyone for attending our talk today. We're actually coming to you from Connecticut, which is on the east coast of the United States, on the traditional homelands of the Quinnipiac people. So we're going to share our deck right now to share with you.
Yeah. And do we make the switch, or does someone on your end show our other screen?
I think we share.
Yeah, share.
Okay. Good.
Okay. So this is object system variable.
Emerging forms in print. We're Drawdown Books. We started this publishing imprint in 2012, originally as a way to publish our own publications, and it soon grew into a retail space where we also sell artist books, zines, and printed matter from art book publishers and graphic designers around the world. I'm Kathleen Sleboda. This is Christopher Sleboda, and these are our official portraits that we share. But you get to see us live and in person today, so hopefully we won't seem quite as static as these portraits.
We're very serious, as our portraits show.
So we're going to tell you a little bit about Drawdown first, our name, where we came from, and then how we started using publishing as part of our design education practice. So the name Drawdown, people often wonder where it comes from. It's actually a technical term related to the production of printed matter, and graphic designers are usually very familiar with these materials. So ink drawdowns are actually this format that you get when you're testing what ink looks like on different types of paper. So it's really important that you do this because, you know, if your paper is a little more yellow, a little bit more blue, that Pantone color that you spec'd might look quite different. So designers who are working and publishing books usually have huge collections of these drawdowns where the printer has drawn down the ink sample over the paper that you propose to use, and you get a really good idea of what the actual ink on paper will look like. So we really were interested in sort of methodical examination of production when we started Drawdown, and our original idea was we were going to look at different sorts of formats. And so this idea of going and looking really closely at this essential part of bookmaking was the root of our name. So when we started in 2016, we were asked to teach a class at the Rhode Island School of Design, and we wanted to bring that sort of methodical examination and that thinking about process into teaching design. And we were asked to teach a class in experimental form making, which was terrific because it was a class for seniors and for students in the graduate school, a really sort of open sandbox where they could explore making with sort of parameters that we facilitated, but it was very open-ended where they could bridge it with their own interests. So we started teaching in 2016 at the Rhode Island School of Design, which is in Rhode Island, Providence, Rhode Island. And it was a very hands-on class. It's wonderful for us to share these images now of teaching in person because for the past year and a half, I've been teaching mainly online. But getting back to this idea of hands-on learning, this is actually sequencing a book in class sort of collectively. And we were really interested in this idea of collaboratively making books. But how would we sort of bridge that with the design class we were tasked with teaching? Well, we decided that one of the essential aspects of the class would be that we wanted to have it be public facing. The work that was produced in class was meant to be shared so that students could kind of use both the online form, but also the books that we would produce as ways to circulate their work, to get it out into the public and to get feedback. And as people who were running, Drawdown for a few years at that point, and we've been involved in our book fairs, we were really interested in these moments of exchange that happen, both online, with the social media through Drawdown, but also in person at book fairs. And we knew that we could take work that was produced in class and share it with people at book fairs, and that was really important. So we began the very first class with a sort of icebreaker moment. And I think any teachers out there will know that first class is often very important in sort of bringing people together, especially if you're working with students from different years who may not know each other, or even from different disciplines who may not be in the same program. Sort of bringing people so that they're all on the same page and they can just make things together collectively. That seems to be a really good way to break down any barriers and just get a really solid start. So Christopher's going to talk a little bit about this particular.
Yeah, so the idea too was we're going to have this collaborative project on the first day of class, and then we're going to print 1,000 copies of it with a newsprint broadside. So we're really raising the stakes that we're taking this serious, and we want you to take this serious too. So in the first rotation of newly formed, we presented the students with one of the more weirder visual 19 minutes of Stanley Kubrick's 2001: A Space Odyssey, and then provided them with some materials where they had to sort of immediately respond to it through some visual making. And then that's transitioned into other collaborative projects on the first day of class that do end up being in broadsides. In this one, we had the students make different numbers out of groups of 4 or 5 students, and with also supplied materials. And that manifested itself in a publication called E Pluribus Numerals, from many become one.
And I think at this point in class too, we're often really interested in sort of instinctive making, sort of gestural making. Since we're working with students who have really firm foundations in graphic design, this is a place when they can kind of come back to that form making that's so essential, that sort of is just a part of human nature, to make letters and numbers out of very simple materials. And I think creating linkages there, that we're going to treat that work seriously by publishing it, becomes a really integral point of the class. We also, for us personally as educators, we really like documenting process. And because this is a process-based graphic design class that we're teaching, modeling that behavior, so documenting all of the sort of making and encouraging the students to document their making processes, also becomes an important core place. And that's what also we sort of thread into the publications that we produce.
So after that first in-class project, we introduced the first project that will be due in a week. And essentially the students in the newly formed class are making 3 different typefaces, one based on objects, another that's system-based, so sort of modular, and then a third one that's conceptually variable. And so it's really like you don't have a lot of time to think about it. You just have to immediately start making, because you're making either an uppercase or lowercase design for 3 different alphabets. And again, what we commit to the students for that is that it's going to be printed in a newspaper broadside.
So here's the first broadside we produced. I think it was 2017. And Chris is going to walk us through some of the fine typographic work and talk about the aspects that we selected. So we'd have the students first do a week where they just do the 3 sets, and then the next week they typeset the words. And then we actually lay out the publication. So the students have that experience too of pre-production, which we actually think is pretty important and isn't always part of design education, but producing things to be printed, doing things to spec. And so there's like a really practical aspect of the publication process for us, even though the actual product itself tends to be on the more sort of experimental side.
So this is quite large, like 22 or so inches, and it's printed on a lightweight 28-pound newsprint, and basically just taking some of the best typographic specimens. This is one of our favorites from a designer, Gabriel Melcher, who used just a roll of masking tape. And we love how, he had thick and thin tape, but instead of the O shapes just being like one empty tape interior, he's using 5 of those tape holders to make the O, or to make the top of the R or the curve of the D. So we love also the Dido-esqueness of the thick and thin strokes that are provided by the two different thicknesses here, the M, particularly to that balance. Here you can see some other work combined throughout in that first one. For the second year, you know, that we get to share the previous publication with the students. So now what's nice is people aren't repeating what has been done, but they're building upon the work of the previous classes. Some of our favorites here was this newly formed type rendered out of Q-tips, which are those little cotton balls on the end of sticks that apparently are not safe for your ears, but for everything else. And this was done analog. So Lake Buckley photographed this after precisely placing them all. And we love the radiuses of the curves, you know, how the distance between the tips of each Q-tip gets wider and wider around the curves and then tighter and tighter.
And I would say, too, one of the things, especially early on in the classes we were teaching, students really enjoyed the object part of the practice, because the idea of working with materials away from the screen and then importing them into the digital seemed to be a really invigorating process. And just working with the sort of materiality, the limitations of the material they selected, ends up creating these really interesting decisions that they're you know, they can't Photoshop away, as it were. And so that's one of the things that we really enjoyed too. And like seeing Lake's process here, her photographs of all the different variations she did, you know, she's produced this body of work that's really, really beautiful.
This is a great double stacked typeface by who was a senior undergrad.
So Hae-Jung Choi did this, and one of the things that we love, because we're working with undergraduates and graduate students, is the kind of synergy that can happen. So Lake Buckley, who did the Q-tip typeface, she actually used Hae-Jung's typeface in her thesis work. The doubling effect actually sort of mirrored some of the conceptual work that she was doing. And for us, that's one of the most gratifying pieces of Newly Formed, because we're bringing students in sometimes from very different years, very different backgrounds. Sometimes we've had film students, animation students take the class. There's ways that they can share based on their particular knowledge bases. And I think that sort of spirit of collaboration, of peer-to-peer sharing, is something that we really enjoy. And I think that the fact that we're publishing together helps really support that effort.
Drew Lidowitz was obsessed with making a typeface out of NBC's Peacock logo, if that rings any bells to you. But we think he was quite successful, and here's a nice detail of the letter W. Then we really upped the stakes after a few years. So instead of that 28-pound newsprint that when we had some kicking around is aging a little bit, we upgraded to 50-pound newsprint, which is thicker and whiter, and then two-color printing, which was really exciting, and more of a tabloid format. So this was the first one with green as our spot color in 2018. And then we can showcase more process photos that are really just great documentation of the wonderful students that we get to interact with. And we did more pages as well. So, you know, consistently upping the bar. This is a nice detail from Can Yang, who's just finishing up her master's at the Royal College of Art in London. And she came up with this really intricate, interesting grid to create those letters. Here's another tape typeface, but this time the emphasis is on that twisting from the front to the back and how that affects the curves, which is different than what we saw with Gabe Melcher's approach earlier. And then in 2019, we had blue as our spot color. And again, consistently seeing better and better work as we go through, because all of the previous students then get free copies of the existing publications. And we've got also one of our favorites here too is this newly formed specimen by Fabian Foer, who came into the class with some typeface design experience. This was his object-based typeface, and he used actually real spaghetti pasta. Here's a process photo that he posted on Instagram. And what we love about that is we could have totally accepted or seen, you know, this just being photoshopped and scanned in and keeping some of the sort of messy edges. But what we loved about Fabian's process is he used this to sort of map out the relationship of the different pasta pieces, the bendability of what those curves would become in the typeface, and some of the overlapping forms, and then sort of cleaned it up and digitized it. So Newly Formed is really this space that allows people to try things encourages people to try things that they probably wouldn't ordinarily. So we're really pushing at the edges and boundaries of their usual process. And here we have another object-based typeface by Taya, who we can see here. And I guess this is a device that people use when they're learning the guitar. So even these things that you wouldn't think to have anything to do with type, you can create all of these sort of interesting letter forms out of it.
So one thing I wanted to add before we close this section is that, the students get copies, but we also will send them out to people who order from Drawdown. We take them to book fairs. They really circulate out in the world. We do trades with other schools. It's a wonderful way for the students to have their work sort of out, and I think too that it's more experimental. There's this sort of freedom. And I think the fact that it's something that's meant sort of to be invigorating, like we've seen other educators responding well to it as well. And I think I'm interested in that sort of seeding and pollination effect. We certainly see it in art book fairs where people go to an art book fair and they're like, I can start this in my community. I think sharing models of teaching through the sort of art book fair network is another way of sort of using that network and helping share our resources and our ideas and our practices.
And simultaneously, as we've been really pushing this very experimental letter forms and at the edges of legibility, this semester at Boston University, I've started teaching traditional letter form as part of junior typography and graduate typography. So students are learning fundamentals of typeface design and how the printed typefaces we're used to today are actually based on handwritten forms with calligraphy. Here you're seeing a student write lowercase letters with a broad nib pen using a translation model of typefaces. Some capitals here also. We've experimented with the pointed nib and more of the expansion model. And then also the inside out method where you're sketching at a 30-degree angle to get that sort of thick and thin strokes. So I'm really excited about simultaneously finding ways to take this more traditional typeface design and create some interesting Rhode printed publications to share and spread, as well as the experimental forms that we're doing in the newly formed course.
So at the end of the class, when we were teaching newly formed, we always really wanted to have a capstone that sort of draws materials together. During the class, we're doing a lot of differently scaled work. We're working like huge wall, giant pieces and posters. We work on screen. We have lots of pinups. There's printed pieces that are produced. We're really trying to work through a wealth of formats. I will say the very first class we taught, we actually had 24 briefs. So the students were really tasked with creating media in all different formats. We've sort of settled on more around 14 assignments just to be reasonable, especially under the current conditions. But there is such a wealth of material that's produced. These are all images from our very first class. It's all graphic experiments, working with different types of materials. And then I think we thought we really wanted to have something that was sort of a memorial and drew everything together in a really substantial way. And we wondered about how we could take a lot of this spatial work and think about the space of the book as a way to be a collaborative sort of memento space for this work. Here's one of our working on space, working on the wall and showing the work on screen, because of course there's ways that the optics work very differently. So I think, okay, enough of the work. We just love taking photos of the crits that we've done. So our first idea was to produce a collaborative book. So this was the first year when we had a small cohort of students in the class. It ended up being about 1,800. I forget how many. Do you know how many?
18. Yeah.
It's a very thick book. Basically, it was the extent of what could be published on demand. So it was, we called it the brick when we produced it. And in class, we actually laid out laid out the sections, and each student had a specific discrete amount of pages, and they could kind of showcase the work that they wanted. And it became this really nice capsule of all those experiments that they had, and they had full art direction over that particular section. But then everyone laid out and pinned up the work and had feedback from the other students in the class. And I think that was a really useful, sort of valuable collaborative lesson. And then all of the original briefs that are part of the class structure are at the very end. So we share our teaching tools in this book as well. But I think, you know, this isn't a book that's meant to be read. It's really a book that's meant to be dipped into and inspired. I think for us too, it's become really nice as we move further and further away from this period of time. The materials become, the pieces that were produced become a reflection of the tools that were available, as well as the sort of interests of the students and the socio-cultural background. I'm actually trained as a historian and an archivist, so I'm really interested in sort of what this printed material does, sort of past the point of its commercial marketability, but what it sort of documents. So I think in terms of like documenting our teaching and documenting sort of student practice, these are really valuable. So our second year, we actually had maybe twice the number of students. We had almost 20 students in this class.
Yeah, so we had double the amount of students, but we tried to do everything the same. So it was much more challenging. So when we gave every student, 20 or 30 spreads, we couldn't fit it in Lulu or Blurb's limitation of the previous book, which was 600 pages. And we were really excited to get that thick spine, but it sort of backfired on us because here we had to put it in 2 books, and this ended up being like 1,800 pages between the 2 volumes. 1,820 pages. And here's a selection of those. So again, it was the same great energy, but did become quite a big project to manage all of this content, and then we distributed it, which was really well received by both faculty and students from many other graphic design programs. So by the time we came to the 3rd year, we said we need to rethink that. And this one was just 32 pages. So the extreme opposite of 1,820 pages. So it's a 32 pager, but it has 2 different trim sizes.
And we really benefit here from the fact that the name of the course that we teach is newly formed, which means we literally think of it as a class that forms itself again every year. So we can sort of tweak things and reformulate things, and this sort of changing form is really related to the sort of heart of the class and is part of the spirit of the class.
So we featured some highlighted work, and then often Kathleen asks people throughout the semester, is there anything that anybody wants to work on that you haven't worked on yet?
And one of the thesis students told us, well, she was talking with the graduate advisor and she wanted to do a project about masks. And the question came up, can masks be graphic design? And I thought, oh, that's a perfect prompt. Our prompt will be, make a mask that embodies your graphic design practice. And little did we know that masks would become so much a part of our life several years later. But these are much more sort of expressive masks. And I thought this was really wonderful as well, because we had these portrait sessions with the students. And photography is always part of what we're teaching as part of graphic design, both for the sort of documentation part of it and documentation of your work, but also we think photography can be a really useful tool in a design practice. So having that photography and that documentation, and then the publishing of that work, of this really beautiful work that the students did, was like such a nice ending moment for those students.
So in addition to the projects that are like part of the curriculum, the publishing projects together, sometimes students make really interesting projects that we are interested in contacting them later and then publishing it as a standalone project.
So this was a booklet project that one of our students who had an architecture background did. It was called Place Non-Place, and basically it was a close looking at one particular space in Providence, Rhode Island, and the sort of minimal compositions based on the analysis of that space. We found this really evocative. There's a real purity to the forms. Scarlett Jin Meng was getting her MFA at the time, and we just said that this was such a really lovely sort of conceptual work that we really thought it should be shared more widely. So we partnered with her and collaborated on the publication of this work that she presented. Another way that we publish work that is related to our teaching practice is through exhibitions that we curate. So in 2016, we had a project in New York City. We were actually asked to do a pop-up shop as Drawdown Books at a small retail space called Project Number 8. As it turned out, they were closing down, and so when we brought all our books, we saw that the walls were completely empty. And we said, "Can we use these walls?" And they said, "Well, sure you can, but you only have a week because we want to like open and launch the store in a week." So we said, "Okay, who do we know?" Well, we know our students have posters. We know a lot of designers in New York City. Christopher was also working at the time as the director of graphic design at the Yale University Art Gallery, and he worked with a lot of students from the Yale MFA program. So we knew a lot of students in that particular school. So we just contacted everybody we knew, and it was a real sort of come together moment. Like, do you have posters that you've made? Can you bring them to the shop on Friday afternoon? We had a rush session with some students who volunteered, putting these up on all the walls, salon style. And that night, it's called these posters are fireworks because the opening was on the 4th of July. So that night,
which is a holiday in the United States.
Which is a big holiday in the United States. And people had said, nobody will be in New York City on the 4th of July. Well, it turns out everybody that we knew was all the designers came, and it was such a huge party. And what was really wonderful for us is that we were able to introduce people from these different communities, from RISD and Yale, from New York City, a lot of international designers to each other. And it was this really great sort of, I think, community that was rooted in the book, but sort of extended beyond the book. So at the exhibition space, at the pop-up shop, we actually gave away these publications for free. This was a real put together a publication as quickly as you can. We know a great little printer in New York City, Linco, that publishes offset, and they do a lot of like tabloids and commercial publications, so they can do very quick turnarounds. So we literally uploaded the file Wednesday, picked the booklets up Friday. We're able to have them in people's hands. And this we've continued also to carry at Drawdown in years since. And I think it too becomes like another model for people who are looking at ways to bring people together and to publish quickly. It becomes something that we can use to like promote the teaching, promote the artists and the designers who participated. But it also becomes like a great record and a memento for us. And as an archivist, I just like to document as much as possible, because I know that these sorts of events that we participate in, the more documentation there is, the more that they'll be folded into the official histories. So I'm always sort of thinking about that with our publications.
And then there's, of course, other student publications published by Drawdown. So not necessarily from RISD, but just other students we interact with. So at the Yale University Art Gallery, when I worked there, I was able to hire many, many graduate students through the work-study program. So students pursuing their MFA in graphic design at the Yale School of Art, I'd have maybe 7 or so working with me a couple of hours a week. And then it was a great way to just see what they were working on. So Benjamin Critton was, as one of his school projects, and a kind of pseudo typeface specimen, and also this way to manifest his interest in architecture, created Evil People in Modernist Homes and Popular Films, and self-published it, and it sold out quickly. And we also distributed it at the time. But people were still interested in it. So we approached Ben to see if we can publish as Drawdown the second edition, which has also now sold out. So this was the better Drawdown edition that we had here.
And I love using these student publications as a way when I'm talking to students to talk about their work. I think Ben's project in particular is quite wonderful because it functions as a typeface specimen, but it really is also like architectural commentary, and it's interdisciplinary. There's film studies, because it literally is essays about that topic. It is the most sort of blatant use of like what that title is. So I was so excited. I use that as an example. Like if you're doing a typeface specimen, you can think really substantially about creating a work that can live and circulate in the world in a real way and appeal to people who are interested in different things by creating sort of these cross-disciplinary conversations. So although the first edition, the Evil People in Modernist Homes and Popular Films, has sold out, we were very happy a few years ago that Ben, who's now a spectacularly talented graphic designer with a practice in Los Angeles, he actually published the second volume of the series, which is Sad People in Modernist Homes and Popular Films. So another part of Drawdown is that even if we work with people when they're students, we always really hope that we can continue those relationships as those people move out in the world, have an emerging practice, or go on to great stardom, as the case may be.
So we didn't publish the Sad People version. This is self-published by Ben, but we do help him distribute it. So this is available at drawdown.com. And hopefully when that sells out, maybe we can work with Ben to publish a second run of that one. Another great publication that I found by being invited as a guest critic to a Yale MFA crit was Reasons Not to Do Graphic Design by Yotam Hadar, which he printed as a little kind of sketchy notepad on a risograph printer. So we did a version of this that was quite popular, but it has interesting texts that came out of a graphic design workshop. Things like graphic design is mostly unrealized, heaps of unused sketches and rejected proposals go into the bin. Graphic design is unhealthy because we are at the computer monitor so much. This kind of stress on our mental and physical health. Graphic design has misplaced idealism. Graphic design is forced. So really kind of like looking at, even though we all love graphic design, looking at it with a kind of critical eye of things that maybe we can work on improving. Graphic design is too easy. Graphic design is too hard. So that's currently out of press for many years, but I'm always hoping maybe we'll reprint that one.
I think for me too, as a design educator, really sort of instilling in students this idea that their work is worthy of publication, like whether or not they're partnering with the publisher, but that they can self-publish work, that they can have a voice, that they can circulate these ideas. And Yotam's project in particular, you can feel like that's the MFA, like the stress of the MFA. He's just really using that to facilitate this conversation. And it resonated. Like one of the things I think is so powerful about self-publishing too, is that you can take these thoughts that you have, share them with the world, and connect with people who connect with those thoughts. And it's this really, across time, but also, which is incredible, and across space. And I think using printed matter to do that is something that I'm really passionate about.
Maziar Pavlon was another student that I worked closely with for 2 years while he was pursuing his MFA. And we really got to do some interesting work. And then this was a proposal he shared with us that we were excited to produce called Repertoire. And Maziar was really pursuing this interesting way of creating these very visual graphics out of text, and had all these various ways of reading them, both from a distance and up close. And we really loved the multiple layers of meanings.
So the other piece that we wanted to talk about today, we've sort of talked about all the work that we've done with publishing in our teaching and our practice, are the student and educator publications that we actually curate at Drawdown. So these are a lot of titles produced by programs around the world that we share. And so one of the series that we really love is by the London College of Communication. So some of these are published by schools, some of them are self-published by professors, and some are by students that we're going to showcase. So this is a series that has 3 editions so far. Each year the class produces it, and like newly formed, they revise the publication model each time. The form of the periodical changes, the scale of it, and the contents actually shift depending on the interests of the students. And I think for me, as I mentioned earlier, we hope our publications are a model for others. By carrying the publications from these different design schools around the world, we hope we can seed out the ideas and the publishing work that they're doing and how they're incorporating it into their design education programs to inspire, educators around the world. So at the London College of Communication, they've really used this sort of publication as a way actually to document a lot of public events and programming. There's a real sort of relationship between the public talks and the printed word. And I think that's a great model to kind of seed out into the world.
Right. So I think with each release, there's a sort of public symposium and book launch. And really that series is also about the editorial and authorship process, as well as the design and sort of form making. So yeah, we just got this number 3 in, and I think they're finishing up number 4 soon. So really, it's quite interesting to see the different themes.
And as retailers of this work, we're always really excited ourselves to get our hands on these publications from different design programs. So part of the work of becoming this hub of exchange is that we get to see the work and get inspired by it. And I would say for any other design educators out there, definitely starting your own press and being able to exchange work with other design educators or collect the work of students and make that available. It's just such a really invigorating way to make your practice sort of more energetic.
This is an inspiring publication because it's really just 20 years of all of the wonderful little small run publications. Someone might make 1 or 2 or 5 or 10 or 100, but this has just great photos of it, so they continue to live on.
So this was a publication that Henk Groenendijk, I probably pronounced that incorrectly, in the Netherlands produced, and he's been teaching at the Gerrit Rietveld Academy for the past 20 years. So, he has this treasure chest, basically, of these works that are produced. And I think anybody who's teaching, especially in higher education, knows how much work sort of gets siloed in institutions and in different classroom spaces. So using these publications as a way to share that work. And for me, I think too, thinking about this as being 20 years, like a real capsule of what has gone on in this school, the interests of the students, what has gone on sociopolitically that has been really intersecting with the interests of the students and that they've been passionate about communicating. That becomes like a really sort of beautiful centerpiece to pull together in this publication. This also accompanies an exhibition that Henk has produced around Europe.
And there's a similar publication that's long out of press called Wonder Years Werkplaats Typography, and this documents publication work that was produced in that school from 1998 to 2008.
And personally, we really love collecting this type of work as well as distributing it. As I said, it's great to see the work being produced, but when there's essays by educators, when there's syllabuses and curriculum, these works become not just documents, but they become resources that can continue to be referred back to. This is a publication by John Caserta, who's one of our colleagues at the Rhode Island School of Design. It's about generated sort of editorial publication that's based in coding, and also has essays by designers, alumni, and students from the Rhode Island School of Design. And this, for those people who are interested in sort of using processing as like a core piece of editorial strategy, this has become this real touchstone. This is Tropes from the Cal Arts graphic design program. Again, it's another publication that I think they printed a run of 500 or 1,000, and it's out of print now, but we did carry it when it was available. And it had a theme where the students looked at different tropes in graphic design. Of course, they're the tropes that were current in 2016. They're really reflective of the times that were, pre-COVID now. We have all these like different limiting events that mark time. So, 5 years on from 2016, it's very clear that this has a life beyond even what it meant in that moment. And I'm excited about publications in that way.
And we also carry all of the catalogs and publications of the Hoff-Mitz-Milken Center for Typography in Pasadena, California at the Art Center College of Art and Design. And this is my favorite, which is Lawrence Bruner's publication for when he was the typographer in residence. And this one is now also sold out. So it's great to kind of get these while you can, because they often don't get reprinted.
And one of the things is, I think distribution can often be hard for graphic design programs or sole educators. If they are not working with a big publisher, how do they get this work that's self-published or published by the institution out into the world? And that's where we can help. We partner with like smaller institutions who are like, we've published 500 copies. What are we going to do with this? There's places that I can help advise people to put the work, but I also really love working individually with people who are producing work and coming up with strategies. So I think that's one way that we can work outside of sort of the bigger sort of industry of book publishing to help artists and designers who are working more in the smaller spheres of things, but really want to get their work out in the world and connect with the communities that can really use it.
CalArts is quite famous for producing silkscreen posters for any visiting artists and designers that they have there. So Michael Worthington, who's one of the faculty members here, recently published Inside Out and Upside Down posters from CalArts from 1980 to 2019. And this is a really thick, beautiful book, and I think now maybe just about at the end of its run. And it also had like 50 different covers. So
I think 70 actually.
Yeah,
each book was individual.
Alumni, yeah. So, and then we also just got in this new annual publication produced by Art as called Rush Print, and the first issue is called Bad Type. So it's really a really typographic, heavy featured publication, which again you can't find at many places, but we do have them currently in stock at Drawdown.
So I think for us, one of the things we love is seeing people on their first issue, because we know that things will continue to evolve, but it's also important for us to offer support to people at that stage, because it's so easy to do one volume and then the sort of institutional support or the students who really engage or the faculty that were really engaged move on. So I think anything we can do to kind of help support those efforts and maintain a little bit of support is work that we're really inclined to do. So we're going to show some of the work that we just got in most recently in 2021. There's these two publications. This is actually a publication by a student who took Newly Formed and is now teaching at the University of Tennessee. His students were responding with these public performative works, and they did a collaborative publication at the end of the term. And it's sort of about living with COVID. And he used Newly Formed as a model to sort of, help engage the students and make their work feel seen. And I think, especially for students and faculty who are working maybe in regions where there's not a real distribution network for the work that they're producing. Tennessee is not near New York City or San Francisco or LA or one of the big art centers. They can still make work that goes to those centers, that can tie back to their community, that can make people aware of what's going on. And so I think helping sort of create those relationships and build those bridges for people is something we're really excited about. And this is a really beautiful publication by a design educator, Elaine Lopez, who is teaching at MICA, the Maryland Institute of College of Art in Baltimore, Maryland, for the past 2 years, and now will be teaching in New York City. She's really a whiz at the risograph. And so this is the second risograph publication she's collaboratively done with students, reflecting on the teachings of Bell Hooks. This one is called Making to Transgress, Risograph Printing as a Practice of Freedom. It has beautiful works that the students have composed in the graphic design department at MICA. And again, because it's produced under, COVID quarantine, there's also sort of a way that it's reflecting on the times that we live in. And it becomes this really beautiful record of that. So I really love supporting design educators and students who are producing this type of work. These are just some of the spreads. And I think the last one, I really wanted to end on this slide because I thought the work on the left, this is trust, mutual growth, genuine nurture, holistic wholeness, passionate commitment. I thought those are all qualities that I think design education can center itself around. I mean, really any education can center itself around art education. And I really wanted to connect sort of the practice of artist publishing. There has to be trust and mutual growth going on in order for that sort of practice to thrive. So hopefully this has been inspiring to those of you who are teaching, who might want to teach, maybe who want to do projects with students. And basically, we just want to thank you now for attending the talk.
Thank you so much. Let's give applause for them. Yeah, that was really interesting. I wanted to ask you, do you practice with the students some part of the distribution? Like you print with them, you design the books with them, but do you accompany them to fairs or put them in a situation to have to distribute their works or explain their publications to the public?
Well, what's interesting is a number of students we've taught have gone on to participate in fairs with their own presses. And then a lot of the programs themselves, RISD has an art book fair. So a lot of the students participate and can bring the publications that they've done in our class to that and have, participate either as themselves or as part of the graphic design community. Boston University graphic designers also participate in the Boston Art Book Fair. So there's lots of opportunities for students to sort of facilitate. And when we've done those individual books with students like Scarlett, who had that really minimalistic architectural piece, she actually represented Drawdown at the Shanghai Art Book Fair. So she was able to talk about her work and talk about those books that we produced with her class in person, which has been great for us because we participated in book fairs where we really physically couldn't be able to travel and probably to talk to all the people there. So using and capitalizing on the relationships that are developed in class, certainly the students do represent their work. It's not every year that we're able to engineer that, but we certainly do also encourage our students to participate in our book fairs. And those ones who are producing printed work and really seem like you need to be putting your work out. I post about the book fairs that are occurring regionally, locally, and internationally as much as possible in those channels that are directed at the students as well.
I'd also add, when I was at the Yale University Art Gallery, I organized and curated the Odds and Ends Art Book Fair for 6 years. And that was a one-day annual event where really I worked with the faculty there. Pamela Hovland taught a class to senior graphic design students, and one of her actual projects was the students had to design a zine that would then be sold at the art book fair. So in addition to like current students having tables and the graduate students, I invited alumni, graphic design programs from the regional area within a 2-hour driving distance, and then all of the sort of art book makers from the New York, Boston, Providence area. So it was really, we'd bring about 80 or 90 exhibitors together from all different levels of their career, like emerging to people who've been in art book publishing for 20, 30 years together into that space. So I think that's the most interesting space, is seeing all of those people come together from different areas. So hopefully we'll continue to find more ways, especially as we ease back into more in-person events.
Yeah. I don't know if anybody has any questions. No? Okay. So yeah, thank you for your conference, and all the books from Down, they will be available at the collective table, Sam, right there. Yeah, this was a great way to end the program of the fair. Thank you so much again.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, we're very honored.